Okay, this is going to be part 2 of your Unit 3 review video. And so this section we're going to talk about average and marginal costs and revenues. So we discussed the difference between economic costs versus accounting costs. And this was kind of an important distinction. We said that economists, and therefore our models, are going to take into account implicit costs. And accounting costs do not do this. So an implicit cost would be the opportunity cost of doing something, or the value of the best foregone alternative. So we're going to say that as economists, our models take into account implicit costs. This is an important distinction. Especially, I think it also helps us kind of wrap our heads around why a firm that experiences normal profit isn't necessarily in a bad position. We also talked about fixed costs versus variable costs, and we see that language again of fixed and variable that we saw in, and of course, cost functions are related to production functions. These will be short-run cost functions that we'll be talking about and looking at right now. But fixed costs are obviously costs that are not going to vary with output. Variable costs vary with output. And you can think of it as, like your fixed costs are sunk or cannot be recovered in the short run, because in the long run, all costs are variable. There's no such thing as a fixed cost. But in the short run, we say that there are going to be fixed costs, and those fixed costs will be the rental rate of capital. Think of maybe if you put in for a lease for a coffee shop, that's fixed, right? It's not going to be a cost that varies with output, as opposed to variable costs such as labor, right? That's going to vary depending on the amount of output. As you expand output, you're going to face increasing variable costs, and variable costs vary with output. Sorry, I just came from a run. That's why I'm a little tired. And then ATC, we talked about this. These functions, these are the things that we're going to graph right now. Finally, total costs equals fixed costs plus variable costs. And then these are some important sort of identities to know. ATC is total costs over the quantity of output. Average variable cost is total variable cost over the quantity of output, and marginal cost is the change in C over the change in Q. Again, you can think of marginal cost as the slope or the rate of change of a cost function, right? And since we're, again, going to be working with curves, we should know that the rate of change isn't going to be constant. So we can see pretty explicitly marginal costs at some point in this short run cost function diagram was initially downward sloping and then increasing marginal costs. Okay, and so how this relates to the previous video is, again, maybe initially we were talking about macaroons. Where are my macaroons? Okay, I don't think I brought my macaroons. I think I put them back in the fridge, but we can see initially downward sloping marginal costs, and this reflects that diminishing marginal returns hasn't kicked in yet, but eventually as marginal cost curve becomes upward sloping, diminishing marginal returns kicks in. And so we can actually think of this conceptually as kind of two functions, right? And we're relating this material to what was in the previous video, but you get increasing marginal costs because you have diminishing marginal returns, and you have diminishing marginal returns because you have diminishing marginal product. And you can think of it kind of makes sense, right? Because if we're graphing cost curves with output, as you expand output, eventually you're going to, suffer diminishing marginal returns. So your marginal costs will be increasing, right? And this is a significant phenomenon in economics, I mean, if there's no constant marginal costs, then our average total cost curve will be upward sloping at some point. It was initially downward sloping, and then the average variable cost curve is going to be upward sloping too. And so this increasing cost curve is significant, right? It's an interesting idea, right? It tells us that as we expand output in the short run, because capital is fixed, right, we face increasing costs. That's an interesting idea. Is that all I wanted to discuss in this video? Yeah, that's all we'll discuss for now.